Hey y'all, welcome back to my kitchen. I'm Ashley and it's time for another 30-minute meal. This week we are making a delicious pasta dish with roasted tomatoes and pesto and mozzarella cheese and some chicken. And it is delicious, I love it, and it's quick and easy and I can't wait to share it with you. So we're going to go ahead and start with a few reminders on how to get a dinner on the table really fast. So as I mentioned in my shrimp and grits episode, you want to make sure that you have all of your ingredients close by. A lot of time is lost running back and forth to the pantry and the refrigerator trying to find ingredients. In a professional kitchen, we call this mise en place, and it means everything in its place. So I encourage you, before you start making this recipe, to go ahead and have all of your ingredients close by. We're gonna go ahead and start with two things in the very beginning to get ready for this recipe. The first one is to preheat your oven to 375 degrees, and the other one is to put a large stock pot or saucepan of water on an oven and on a stove and bring it to a boil. And that'll be our first steps to getting started. After the oven is preheated and the water is starting to boil, then we will go ahead and begin with roasting our tomatoes. So here I have a container, so a 1 pint container of cherry tomatoes, and I'm going to toss them with some olive oil, probably about a tablespoon, maybe a tablespoon and a half, and a sprinkling of salt, about a half a teaspoon, and a quarter of a teaspoon of pepper. And we'll toss that together in a bowl just to make sure the tomatoes are evenly coated. And then I'm going to lay it on a parchment lined sheet pan. Whenever you're working with a sheet pan, I like to, in roasting tomatoes specifically, or any tomato product, I like to make sure that it's lined because the tomatoes and the metal sheet pan can react together. So I will go ahead and line it with parchment paper, and then we will put the cherry tomatoes all along. Just spread them out a little bit. And we're going to put this again in a 375 degree oven, and we'll cook it until the cherry tomatoes start to burst. So let's go ahead and put those in the oven. Once the tomatoes are in the oven, the next thing we're going to do is put the pasta into our stock pot full of boiling water. So I like to salt. Ooh, you can see how hot that is, all the steam. I like to salt the water when you put the pasta in because that will season the pasta as you are cooking it. So I always say salty like the sea with pasta. Make sure that it's a very well salted boiling water pot. And a quick tip, whenever you're trying to boil water fast, always just put a lid on top of the stock pot, and that just traps the heat and it allows it to boil faster. And then we are going to pour in a whole entire container of penne pasta. So a full container. This dish serves 4 people. And we'll put the lid back onto the pasta, or back onto the stock pot, and bring it back to a boil, and then it will boil until it's a little bit past al dente, which is about 11 minutes. While the tomatoes are cooking and the pasta is boiling, we're going to go ahead and trim and dice up some chicken thighs. These are boneless, skinless chicken thighs, and they stay nice and juicy whenever they cook. It's my preferred type of chicken whenever I'm cooking. And we're going to marinate it just very briefly while the tomatoes are cooking, and then we are going to put it into underneath a boiler and let it cook for like 5 to 7 minutes. So it's a quick way to fully cook chicken in a short amount of time. So we'll go ahead and just trim a little bit of the extra fat on the chicken thigh, and just be careful, of course you're working with a sharp knife, so just carefully trim those pieces off. And we're going to trim a whole entire pound of chicken, so that's about 4 boneless, skinless chicken thighs. And we're just cutting them into about 1 inch pieces. So we'll put those into a bowl and chop up all the chicken. I'd say maybe a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. You do want them the same size so they cook evenly underneath the broiler. I love this dish because it is all in one, so you can serve it in one serving dish all together, and the chicken adds a lot of protein to the dish. You can of course do it without chicken if you're trying to have a vegetarian meal. Also, if you are wanting to not do pasta, I really like to do this with spaghetti squash as well. Doug's got his eye on the water over here, so keep an eye on your pasta. Make sure it doesn't boil over with that lid on. Once we have the chicken diced up, we want to make sure that we completely clean our kitchen area that we're working in. You definitely don't want to cross-contaminate anything, and we just chopped up raw chicken, so let's go ahead and take the cutting board and knife, remove it from the area. The plate that the chicken was on, we'll go ahead and move that too, and then we'll marinate our chicken. Okay, now that we have our area cleaned, let's go ahead and marinate the chicken. So I have some dried oregano, some garlic powder, salt and pepper, and olive oil. So we'll go ahead and just drizzle a little bit more olive oil, again, probably about 1 tablespoon to 2 tablespoons. And then a 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper, and a pinch of the garlic powder. If you really like garlic, you can do more than that. It's probably the equivalent to about 1/4 teaspoon. And then another 1/4 teaspoon of the dried oregano. So since we kind of have some Mediterranean flavors going here with the cherry tomatoes and the basil pesto, actually it's probably a little bit more Italian, I'm adding the oregano in to add that additional flavoring for the concept of our dish. And we'll go ahead and toss the chicken together to get all of the seasoning and oil on the chicken. And we'll let this sit in the bowl in the refrigerator until the cherry tomatoes are finished. Then we will change the oven to broiling. I choose the high broiler in my oven, and then I move the oven rack to the high position, or about like 6 inches below the broiling element. And we will cook this for about 5 to 7 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and pop this in the refrigerator. While everything is in its cooking stage, so we've got the pasta almost there. I'll show you what it looks like when it's at an al dente state. They're still a little too firm. If you take a bite of it, it's got too firm of a chew. So we'll let that go for about 2 more minutes. And the cherry tomatoes probably have another 5 minutes to go. But I want to talk to you about pesto. So when it comes to making a really fast meal, to me, pesto is a secret ingredient. And it doesn't always have to be a traditional basil pesto. You can use kale, you can use roasted bell pepper. There are a lot of different options to make pesto, but my favorite one to have on hand all the time is the traditional basil pesto. And it's really easy to make at home, but of course you can get a jar of pesto in the supermarket. They have it in the refrigerated section. They also have it in the jarred section, kind of in the pasta aisle. And I like to have it and make it in a big batch because it freezes really well. So in a traditional basil pesto, you've got basil, you have parsley, Parmesan cheese, toasted pine nuts, and some garlic. And then I just mix it in a food processor with some olive oil, and this is what it looks like. So if you are going to freeze a big batch, I like to portion it out into individual containers and then put a film of plastic wrap on top so the basil doesn't turn brown when it's freezing. And then you can just take off the plastic wrap when you are ready to use it and thaw it out, and you can have fresh basil or fresh pesto pasta on hand. I think when you're really wanting a burst of flavor in a quick meal, that is a secret ingredient to always have on hand. Let's go ahead and try our pasta and see what it tastes like, see if it's finished. So this pasta has been boiling again for about 10 minutes at this point. And so I'm just going to take a few out of the pan, and we'll give one a little bit of a taste. It's super hot, so just let it cool for a second. Sometimes I just put them on the counter so that they can cool off. And perfect. It has a little bit of chew to it, but it's nice and soft. We'll go ahead and take this off the heat, drain it through a strainer in the kitchen sink, rinse it with some cold water so the pasta doesn't stick together, and then we're going to put it in a bowl and toss it with the pesto. As I mentioned earlier, the pasta and the tomatoes should probably finish around the same time. The cherry tomatoes that I used were a little bit bigger, so it is taking a little bit longer than when the pasta took to boil, and that's totally fine. But we'll go ahead and let those continue cooking in that 375-degree oven until the tomatoes start to burst open and they get a little caramelized on top. So we'll go ahead and toss the pasta in the basil pesto while we're waiting for those tomatoes to finish up. So I'm going to go ahead and add some pesto. Now I like to do pesto based off of the preference of whoever's eating the meal. So since this is for my family, I know we like a good pesto dish. So I will go ahead and add probably at least a half a cup of pesto, if not a little bit more. But we'll start with a half a cup and toss it with the noodles. And again, these are the drained noodles that we just finished cooking, and I rinsed them in cold water so they don't stick to each other. The addition of the pesto keeps that from happening too. But you can see we have a well mixed, the noodles look like they're coated pretty well into the pesto. I'm going to add just another spoonful. And then this I'll put in an individual container and freeze it so we have it on hand. And then I'm going to put this in a casserole dish. So I'll assemble the dish in an oven-safe casserole dish that I have. And we'll just pour this in. And really, if you're looking for like a quick lunch, you can just eat this as is. Sprinkle a little bit of mozzarella cheese on top or Parmesan cheese, and you are totally fine for a delicious lunch. You can also use a 9x13 casserole dish. It doesn't have to be a circle or anything like that. Use what you have in your kitchen. And then I'm going to go ahead and toss a little bit or sprinkle around on top some baby mozzarella. So these are just little tiny mozzarella balls. They sell them in a, it looks like a larger ball, but they're just crammed together in a vacuum sealed pack. But I go ahead and break that open and then just crumble the mozzarella balls apart. And we will just put this on top of the pasta. And if you want these melted, then once we add the cherry tomatoes, you can pop this back into the oven and melt the mozzarella cheese on top. Or if you're preparing this ahead of time, if you're doing some meal prep, then you can put it in the refrigerator with plastic wrap on top and then put it into the oven the next day just to warm it up at 350 degrees. That's something I like to do a lot. Just make a quick batch of this on the weekend, and then we just heat it up the next night for dinner. I love these things. So we'll set this aside and wait for the cherry tomatoes to finish cooking. All right, the tomatoes have finished cooking, and you can see that they've started to burst open. They're separating from the skins a little bit. You can see the caramelized color on top. This is what we're looking for when we have roasted tomatoes. I'm gonna go ahead and put it back on the stovetop so it can cool while we put the chicken into the broiler. So after I took these out, I went ahead and set my oven to high broiler, and now let's put the chicken onto a sheet pan and pop it into the oven. We'll take the chicken that's been marinating and put it on a foil-lined sheet pan. I like to put foil down just because it's easier to clean up afterwards. And we'll separate the chicken out so it is not overlapping, so each piece can individually cook very quickly in the broiler. We definitely do not want to eat undercooked chicken, so that's why it's important to make sure that they're all separated enough to where they are not hiding and will fully cook. This will go into the oven for probably 7 minutes. We want to make sure they're thoroughly cooked through, but definitely nice and juicy. And I'll temp check each of the thick pieces to make sure that it's fully come to temperature, which is 170. Now you can cook the chicken on a stovetop if you want while you're cooking the pasta and the cherry tomatoes. But I like to use the oven the last part of cooking because then I can also clean the kitchen while I'm making the dish. So that way, when the dish is complete, the dishes are actually also done. And so you really are looking at a 30-minute meal with a clean kitchen. And that's my kind of thing on a weeknight. I just pulled the chicken out of the oven. It's completely at temperature and it just took 5 to 7 minutes. So I love cooking chicken that way for a quick, easy weeknight meal. The cherry tomatoes have cooled a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and add them to the pasta dish. I'm just gonna sprinkle them around. And then I'm going to place this casserole into the oven just to melt that mozzarella cheese a little bit. And because the broiler was just on, you want to give the oven just a few minutes to cool down a little bit so you're not cracking your cookware. But that's only if you want the mozzarella cheese to be nice and melty before you're eating it. So it's totally a personal preference. I'm just gonna pop it in there for a minute or two. Otherwise, we are good to add the chicken and enjoy our 30-minute meal. Okay, the pasta's out of the oven. The mozzarella is just softened enough to where it's kind of oozy on the outside edges, but firm in the center. Of course, you can keep it in there longer if you want. We have the chicken that's cooled just a little bit. So I am going to sprinkle this all over the dish. And this will be a delicious dinner that you can throw on the table during a weeknight meal, and your family will be fed well, you'll feel good about yourself, and you'll all have full bellies. I definitely love this dish. You can also do shrimp. We've done some sauteed shrimp on this dish before. It's equally delicious. And of course, we've got to do a little bit of a taste test. I love that pesto. It's so bright and flavorful. It's kind of garlicky too, so it adds a lot of flavor to the noodle. We'll grab a little bit of chicken and cherry tomato. The chicken's nice and juicy but tender. The burst of the cherry tomato with the flavor is so good. Once you put this in a bowl, you can mix around the ingredients, and that will kind of further distribute the roasted cherry tomato and make a little bit more of a sauce. I love this dish so much. Thank you for watching us this week. If you liked today's episode, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Giving us a thumbs up lets us know that you like the content that we're producing, and we'll continue to do more of that. Thank you so much for your support. Until next time, cook great food in your kitchen, share with those that you love, and we'll see you soon.